The German shepherd's desperate howls shattered the sacred silence of St. Mary's Lutheran Church, his powerful body trembling as he clawed frantically at the polished mahogany coffin. Margaret Mitchell dropped her prayer book, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the stunned congregation. This wasn't grief, it was terror. Gasps rippled through the pews as Duke's barking turned savage, his amber eyes wild with a knowledge that chilled every witness. The elderly woman in the front row clutched her chest, while children began to cry, the scent of lilies mixed with something else, something wrong. Maggie's weathered hands shook as she remembered Tom's final words. "Duke knows, Maggie. He always knows." The same dog who'd saved countless lives was now screaming at her husband's remains with the urgency of a final warning. "Open it," Detective Kate Rodriguez commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos despite her racing heart. What secret had Tom taken to his grave? And why was Duke so desperate to reveal it before it was too late? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, Deputy Sheriff Thomas Mitchell had stood in his kitchen at dawn, watching Duke struggle to climb the back porch steps. The 9-year-old German shepherd's hind legs trembled with each movement, a cruel reminder of the veterinary oncologist's words. 6 months, maybe less. The tumors are spreading faster than we anticipated. Cedar Falls, Iowa had been Tom's world for 30 years. Population 3,500, where everybody knew your name and your business. The kind of place where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone died, and where the high school football team united the entire town every Friday night. Tom had walked these tree-lined streets as both protector and friend, settling disputes over fence lines and staying late to help elderly residents change light bulbs. But now, at 62, everything was unraveling. The veterinary bills had consumed their savings like wildfire. $47,000 for chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments, anything to buy Duke more time. Margaret, his wife of 34 years, had quietly returned to work as a substitute nurse, her gentle hands steady despite the worry lines deepening around her eyes. She never complained, never suggested they should let Duke go peacefully. She understood what Tom couldn't say aloud. Duke wasn't just his partner, he was his soul. Detective Catherine Rodriguez had noticed the change in her mentor. Tom's usual morning jokes had disappeared, replaced by hollow stares and trembling hands when he thought no one was looking. The mortgage default notice tucked hastily into his desk drawer hadn't escaped her sharp eyes. Neither had the mysterious late-night phone calls that left him pale and shaken. Dr. Richard Henley had been Cedar Falls' beloved veterinarian for 25 years. A pillar of the community who'd delivered half the town's pets and comforted countless families through their animals' final moments. His silver hair and gentle demeanor made him everyone's grandfather figure. When Alzheimer's claimed his wife Emma 2 years ago, the entire town had rallied around him, bringing meals and offering support through her decline. What they didn't know was that Emma's care had cost him everything. The exclusive memory care facility demanded $8,000 monthly. Insurance covered barely half. Dr. Henley had mortgaged his practice, sold his investments, even pawned Emma's jewelry. When those resources dried up, desperation had whispered darker solutions. A signature here, an extra zero there, insurance claims for procedures never performed. It had started small, almost innocent. But greed, like cancer, metastasizes. Tom's final morning had begun with Duke's labored breathing and ended with flames consuming the Johnson farmhouse. Inside, a family of 4 had been trapped by smoke and collapsing beams. Tom had carried out the children first, then the parents, his protective instincts overriding every safety protocol. The roof had claimed him on his final trip inside, searching for the family's terrified German shepherd puppy that had hidden beneath a bed. Now, 3 weeks later, Duke's mournful howls at St. Mary's weren't just grief. They were a warning that would expose 25 years of carefully buried secrets and reveal the true cost of blind trust. The Johnson farmhouse had burned like a funeral pyre against the October sky, black smoke billowing across the cornfields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Tom Mitchell had arrived first, his patrol car skidding to a halt as screams echoed from the second-story windows. Without hesitation, he'd charged through the front door into the inferno. "Daddy went back for Rusty," 8-year-old Jenny Johnson had sobbed to the paramedics, clutching her mother's soot-stained nightgown. Rusty was their German shepherd puppy, barely 3 months old, who'd been cowering under Jenny's bed when the electrical fire started. Tom had emerged twice with human lives, first the children, then their parents. But the third time, the roof had betrayed him. Duke had arrived with the backup units, his aging body trembling as he searched the smoking ruins for any trace of his partner. The fire chief had found Tom's body shielding the tiny puppy, both overcome by smoke. The puppy survived. Tom did not. Now, 3 weeks later, St. Mary's Lutheran Church overflowed with mourners whose emotions churned like storm clouds. The same sanctuary where Tom and Maggie had exchanged vows 34 years ago was now draped in black bunting and American flags. His casket, positioned at the altar beneath a stained-glass window depicting the Good Shepherd, seemed almost too small to contain a man who'd loomed so large in their community. But whispers followed the prayers like shadows. "I heard there's money missing from the evidence locker," murmured Mrs. Henderson, the bank president's wife, her voice barely audible over the organ's somber notes. $89,000, her companion replied, adjusting her black hat. "The state investigators were asking questions just yesterday." Maggie sat in the front pew, her shoulders rigid with grief and something else, shame. The foreclosure notice in her purse crinkled each time she shifted, a constant reminder that their financial ruin was about to become public knowledge. Tom's pension hung in limbo, pending the corruption investigation. The house they'd built together, where they'd planned to grow old, would belong to the bank within 60 days. Duke lay beside the casket like a guardian statue, his massive frame reduced by months of cancer treatments and the weight of loss. His once glossy coat had dulled to pewter gray, and each breath seemed labored. Dr. Henley had warned that the stress of Tom's death might accelerate his decline. "Sometimes," the veterinarian had said with practiced sympathy, "the kindest thing is to let them go before they suffer more." Detective Kate Rodriguez studied the crowd with trained eyes, noting the divided loyalties. Half the mourners remembered Tom as the officer who'd coached Little League, organized food drives, and visited nursing homes on his days off. The other half wondered if their trust had been misplaced, if the man they'd revered had been stealing from the very community he'd sworn to protect. She'd worked beside Tom for 8 years, had seen him risk his life for strangers and cry over injured animals. The corruption allegations felt like poison in her blood, but the evidence was undeniable. The money was gone, and Tom had been the only one with access. As Pastor Williams began the eulogy, Duke's behavior changed. His ears pricked forward, then flattened against his skull. A low whine escaped his throat, growing in intensity until heads began to turn. The dog's amber eyes fixed on something beyond the congregation, and his body coiled with tension. "It's all right, boy," Maggie whispered, reaching out to comfort him. But Duke pulled away, his attention laser-focused on the back of the church. Dr. Henley entered quietly, his silver hair disheveled and his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. He'd been delayed, he explained in hushed tones to the ushers, by an emergency call. A farmer's prize bull had needed immediate attention. His veterinary bag hung from his shoulder, the leather worn smooth by decades of house calls. The moment Duke caught sight of the elderly veterinarian, everything changed. The German shepherd's whine transformed into a growl that seemed to emanate from the depths of his soul. His hackles rose like a ridge of steel along his spine, and his lips curled back to reveal teeth that had once brought down armed suspects. Every person in the sanctuary felt their blood chill as Duke's warning filled the sacred space. "What's wrong with him?" someone gasped, but Kate Rodriguez was already moving. She recognized that specific bark, the same alert Duke used during drug searches when he'd detected something deadly hidden from human senses. "Doctor." Henley raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his face creased with concern. "He's grieving," he said softly, his voice carrying the authority of decades caring for animals. "Sometimes they become aggressive when they can't understand loss. I have something in my bag that will calm him." But Duke's response was immediate and violent. As the veterinarian approached, the dying dog summoned strength from reserves that shouldn't have existed, lunging forward with a snarl that spoke of primal knowledge, the kind of instinctual wisdom that had protected humans for thousands of years. Something was terribly, dangerously wrong, and Duke was the only one who knew it. Duke's massive body slammed into Dr. Henley with the force of desperation, sending the elderly veterinarian stumbling backward into the pews. His medical bag flew from his shoulder, contents scattering across the worn carpet like evidence at a crime scene. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary as mourners scrambled away from the chaos, their black funeral attire creating a sea of panicked movement. "Get him off! Someone control that animal!" shouted Mayor Patterson, his face flushed with indignation. But Duke wasn't attacking randomly. His focus remained laser-sharp on the scattered contents of Henley's bag, his nose working frantically as he sorted through scents that meant nothing to humans but everything to his trained senses. Kate Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, her detective instincts overriding the surreal nature of the scene. She'd worked with Duke for years, had seen him differentiate between cocaine and flour, between gunpowder residue and innocent cleaning supplies. This wasn't random aggression. This was an alert. "Everyone stay back," she commanded, her voice cutting through the confusion with practiced authority. Her eyes swept the veterinary supplies now strewn across the church floor. Bottles of medication, syringes still in sterile packaging, surgical instruments gleaming under the stained glass light. Nothing appeared unusual, but Duke's behavior suggested otherwise. "Doctor?" Henley struggled to his feet, his dignified composure cracking like old paint. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, brushing dust from his suit jacket. "I should have anticipated this reaction. Duke's obviously in severe psychological distress. Please, let me sedate him before he hurts someone." The word sedate triggered something primal in Duke. His growl deepened to a register that seemed to vibrate through the church's wooden floors, and his amber eyes fixed on a specific syringe that had rolled near the altar steps. Kate followed his gaze and noticed what the others had missed. This syringe was already filled, its contents clear as water, but somehow wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. Maggie Mitchell rose from the front pew, her grief temporarily overshadowed by protective instinct. "Don't touch him," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Tom always said Duke had better judgment than most people. If he's reacting this way, there's a reason." "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're upset," Dr. Henley replied, his tone carefully calibrated to suggest gentle authority. "But Duke is suffering. His cancer has likely spread to his brain, causing confusion and aggression. The humane thing is to listen to what he's trying to tell us," Kate interrupted, crouching beside the agitated dog. Duke's behavior wasn't random or confused. It was purposeful, directed, the same focused intensity he'd shown when detecting drugs hidden in car tires or explosives concealed in abandoned buildings. The congregation watched in stunned silence as Kate carefully examined the scattered medical supplies. Her fingers hovered over the pre-filled syringe, and Duke's reaction was immediate. a sharp bark that seemed to say, "Yes, that one, that's the danger." "What's in this?" she asked, holding up the syringe without touching the plunger. Dr. Henley's face went pale. Just a mild sedative, acepromazine, perfectly safe for dogs his size." But Kate had pulled out her phone, its flashlight illuminating the syringe's contents. The liquid was indeed clear, but tiny crystalline particles caught the light, particles that shouldn't exist in any veterinary sedative she'd ever seen. "Duke's been trained to detect poisons," she said slowly, the realization dawning like a cold sunrise. "Rat poison, antifreeze, cyanide compounds. That's why he's reacting this way." The church erupted in confused murmurs, but Kate's attention remained fixed on Dr. Henley, whose expression had shifted from concern to something approaching panic. "You're suggesting I would poison a dog at his owner's funeral? That's insane." "Then you won't mind if we test this substance," Kate replied, her detective training taking over. She'd dealt with enough lies to recognize truth's absence, and Dr. Henley's body language screamed deception, the tightening around his eyes, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the slight tremor in his voice. Duke's barking had evolved into something more complex, almost conversational, as if he were trying to explain what his nose had detected. Kate had seen this behavior before, when he'd alerted to accelerants at arson scenes or detected trace amounts of drugs during vehicle searches. He wasn't just warning about the syringe, he was trying to communicate something larger, more complex. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his usually steady voice wavering. "Perhaps we should postpone the service until this matter is resolved. This seems highly irregular." "No," Maggie said with sudden fierce determination. "Tom wouldn't want his funeral disrupted by fear or suspicion, but he would want the truth." She looked at Duke, whose massive head was now resting near the casket, his breathing labored but his eyes alert. "Duke saved Tom's life more times than I can count. If he's trying to save someone else now, we need to listen." The weight of decision settled over the sanctuary like dust. Kate found herself at the center of an impossible choice. Trust the word of a respected veterinarian who'd served their community for decades, or believe in the instincts of a dying dog whose loyalty had never wavered. Duke made the choice for her. With tremendous effort, he rose to his feet and moved to the casket, his paws scraping against the polished wood as he tried to reach something. His barking had become urgent, almost frantic, as if time were running out for whatever message he was trying to convey. "He wants us to open it," Kate said, the words falling from her lips before her rational mind could stop them. The suggestion hit the congregation like a physical blow. Open a casket during a funeral service? The very idea violated every social convention, every rule of respect and dignity they'd been raised to honor. But Duke's desperate eyes held a truth that transcended convention, a knowledge that death hadn't diminished. And somewhere in the scattered contents of Dr. Henley's medical bag lay the key to understanding what that truth might cost them all. The silence that followed Kate's suggestion stretched taut as a funeral shroud. "Open Tom Mitchell's casket." The very words seemed to violate the sacred boundary between the living and the dead, yet Duke's continued agitation suggested something far more urgent than social propriety. "Absolutely not," Mayor Patterson declared, his jowls quivering with indignation. "This is a house of God, not some carnival sideshow. That dog is clearly ill and should be removed immediately." But Maggie Mitchell stepped forward, her weathered hands trembling as she approached her husband's casket. 34 years of marriage had taught her to trust Tom's judgment, and by extension Duke's. "If there's even a chance that Duke knows something we don't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "then Tom would want us to find out what it is." Dr. Henley moved closer, his medical bag now secured firmly on his shoulder. "Mrs. Mitchell, Grief can make us susceptible to irrational thoughts. Duke is dying. His brain is likely affected by the cancer. Please don't let his illness compound your tragedy. Kate watched the veterinarian's body language with trained eyes. Something about his eagerness to dismiss Duke's behavior struck her as wrong. In 8 years of working with the German Shepherd, she'd never seen him react to someone the way he was reacting to Dr. Henley. The dog's hackles remained raised, his amber eyes tracking every movement the elderly man made. "What harm could it do to look?" asked Mrs. Kowalski, the church organist, her voice wavering with curiosity and concern. "If there's nothing unusual, we can close it again and continue the service." The congregation divided like the Red Sea. Half the mourners nodded in agreement, their faces etched with the same desperate hope that had sustained them through Tom's mysterious final weeks. The other half recoiled at the suggestion, viewing it as a desecration of everything they held sacred. Pastor Williams wrung his hands, caught between pastoral duty and unprecedented circumstances. In 40 years of ministry, I've never been asked to—" "Then let's make history," Kate said firmly. She'd made her decision. Duke had never been wrong before, and his desperation suggested lives might hang in the balance. "But we do this carefully, respectfully." Dr. Henley stepped forward quickly. "If you're determined to proceed with this irregularity, then I should examine the body first. As a medical professional, I can ensure that nothing disturbs the dignity of—" Duke's reaction was immediate and violent. The dying dog summoned strength from reserves that shouldn't have existed, placing himself between the veterinarian and the casket with a snarl that raised every hair on every arm in the sanctuary. His message was unmistakable. Dr. Henley was not to touch Tom Mitchell's body. "Why is he so aggressive toward you specifically?" Kate asked, her detective instincts fully engaged now. "You've treated Duke for years. He should trust you more than anyone." The veterinarian's laugh sounded forced, hollow. "Animals sometimes turn on their caregivers when they're in pain. It's not uncommon for terminal patients to—" "Bull." The word came from an unexpected source. Sheriff Bob Crawford, Tom's longtime supervisor, who'd been sitting silently in the back row. "I've worked with police dogs for 30 years. They don't forget who helps them. If Duke's acting like Henley's a threat, maybe we should listen." With careful reverence, Kate and Pastor Williams approached the casket. The polished mahogany gleamed under the church's soft lighting, and Tom Mitchell lay peaceful within, his uniform pressed and his badge polished to mirror brightness. He looked smaller in death, diminished somehow, but his face held the same gentle expression that had comforted countless citizens over 3 decades of service. Duke's barking had softened to an urgent whine, and he was pawing at a specific spot near Tom's chest. Kate followed the dog's focus and noticed something odd. A slight bulge beneath Tom's uniform jacket, something that didn't belong to the standard funeral presentation. "There's something inside his jacket," she said quietly. Maggie nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Tom always kept things close to his heart. Important things." With trembling fingers, Kate carefully opened Tom's jacket. What she found there defied all expectation and explanation. Nestled against Tom's chest, wrapped in his own undershirt, was a tiny German Shepherd puppy, barely 3 months old, the same puppy Tom had died saving from the Johnson House fire. The puppy was barely breathing, its tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate gasps. Its fur was matted and dirty, its small body cold to the touch, but it was unmistakably alive. "Jesus Christ," Sheriff Crawford breathed, forgetting he was in church. The congregation erupted in shocked murmurs, but Kate's attention was fixed on something else she'd found in Tom's jacket. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn as if it had been carried for weeks. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, revealing Tom's distinctive handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I can't live with what I've done. The shame is eating me alive. I took the money from evidence, $89,000, to pay for Duke's treatments. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't let him die. I couldn't be the one to give up on him when he never gave up on me. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm sorry to everyone I've let down. Duke deserves better than a crooked cop for a partner. Maybe it's better this way." The puppy is the Johnson family's dog, Rusty. Henley was going to put him down for insurance purposes, even though he's healthy. "I couldn't let another innocent life be lost because of greed. Take care of each other. Take care of Duke. And please don't let Henley near either of them. I love you, Maggie. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. Tom." The letter fluttered from Kate's nerveless fingers as the full horror of the situation crystallized. Tom hadn't died a hero saving a family from fire. He'd died a desperate man planning his own destruction, intending to take Duke with him rather than face the shame of his theft. "He was going to kill himself," Maggie whispered, her voice breaking. "And Duke, too. He couldn't bear the thought of Duke living without him, especially not with what he'd done." The puppy stirred weakly in Kate's arms, and Duke's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. He'd known. Somehow, through scent or sound or the mysterious connection that bonds dogs to their humans, he'd known that Tom's body held more than just the shell of his beloved partner. But there was more to the story, and Kate's detective mind was already piecing together the inconsistencies. "Wait," she said, studying the letter more carefully. "Tom mentions Henley wanting to put down a healthy puppy for insurance purposes. What insurance purposes?" Dr. Henley had gone pale, his earlier composure completely shattered. That's taken out of context. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made." "What insurance purposes?" Kate repeated, her voice hardening. Sheriff Crawford stepped forward, his expression grim. "The Johnson family filed a claim for their dog after the fire. $5,000 for a purebred German Shepherd with championship bloodlines. Insurance company paid out based on a veterinary death certificate." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Kate looked at the very much alive puppy in her arms, then at Dr. Henley, whose face had gone from pale to gray. "You've been filing false death certificates," she said, "taking healthy animals, claiming they died from various causes, collecting insurance payouts. That's fraud, Dr. Henley. That's multiple counts of fraud." The elderly veterinarian's shoulders sagged as if the weight of 25 years of deception had finally become unbearable. "Emma's care. The facility costs $8,000 a month. Insurance barely covers half. I never meant for it to go so far, but once it started—" "How many animals?" Kate demanded. I can't." "How many?" "Dozens," he whispered. "Maybe more. I lost count." The congregation sat in stunned silence as the full scope of the betrayal sank in. Their beloved veterinarian, the man they'd trusted with their most precious companions, had been systematically defrauding insurance companies and, in all likelihood, killing healthy animals to cover his tracks. But the most chilling realization was yet to come. Kate looked at the pre-filled syringe that had so agitated Duke, then at the dying puppy in her arms, and finally at Tom's letter with its urgent warning, "Don't let Henley near either of them." "You came here to finish the job," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "You came to kill this puppy and probably Duke, too. Make it look like they died from grief or illness. Clean up the loose ends." Dr. Henley's silence was answer enough. Duke, as if sensing that his message had finally been understood, collapsed beside the casket. His breathing was labored, his strength finally depleted by the monumental effort of protecting Tom's secret and warning his human family about the danger in their midst. The puppy whimpered softly, and Maggie reached out with trembling hands to take the tiny creature from Kate. "Tom saved you," she whispered to the puppy. Even at the end, he was still trying to save lives. As the full weight of the revelation settled over the congregation, one terrible question remained. If Tom had stolen the money to save Duke, and if he'd planned to kill himself and his dog rather than face the consequences, how had he really died? And what other secrets lay buried beneath 25 years of blind trust in a man who'd made a career out of death? The sanctuary of St. Mary's Lutheran had transformed from a place of mourning into a courtroom where truth and deception battled for dominance. Dr. Henley stood frozen beside the scattered contents of his medical bag, his silver hair disheveled, and his hands trembling as decades of carefully constructed lies crumbled around him like autumn leaves. Kate Rodriguez cradled the barely breathing puppy against her chest, feeling its tiny heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. Duke lay collapsed beside Tom's casket, his massive frame heaving with exhaustion, but his amber eyes remained fixed on the veterinarian with unwavering accusation. The German shepherd had used the last of his strength to expose a truth that would have died with Tom Mitchell. $89,000, Sheriff Crawford said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. That's what's missing from the evidence locker. That's what Tom supposedly stole. He stepped closer to Doctor Henley, his weathered face hard as granite. But if you've been running insurance fraud for years, if you've been killing healthy animals and filing false death certificates, then maybe Tom wasn't the thief after all. Dr. Henley's facade finally shattered completely. His shoulders shook as 40 years of community respect dissolved in an instant. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking like old paper. "Emma, my Emma, she doesn't even remember my name anymore. She looks at me like I'm a stranger, like our 52 years of marriage never happened." Maggie Mitchell held the tiny puppy close, feeling its weak breath against her neck. "That doesn't justify what you've done," she said, her grief temporarily overwhelmed by righteous anger. "How many families have mourned pets that you murdered for money?" "They were just animals," Dr. Henley said desperately, as if the words might somehow justify the unjustifiable. "Emma is my wife. She's a human being. She deserves the best care available, even if it costs everything I have." "Including other people's lives?" Kate's voice was deadly quiet. "Because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? You didn't just steal money, you killed Tom Mitchell." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from the Johnson House fire, thick and choking and undeniably present. Dr. Henley's face went white as church marble, but his silence spoke louder than any confession. "The phone calls," Sheriff Crawford said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Tom mentioned threatening phone calls in his final weeks. Someone was pressuring him, scaring him. That was you, wasn't it?" Dr. Henley's composure cracked further. "Tom was getting too close. He'd started asking questions about the insurance claims, about the discrepancies in my records. I tried to warn him off, tried to make him understand that some secrets are worth keeping." "So you threatened him," Kate said. "You made him believe he was the one under investigation for the missing evidence money. You gaslighted him into thinking he was losing his mind, that he might have stolen money and forgotten about it." The elderly veterinarian's hands shook as he reached for his medical bag, but Duke's warning growl stopped him cold. Even in his weakened state, the German shepherd remained a formidable guardian. "Tom was a good man," Dr. Henley said, his voice barely audible. "I never wanted him to die. I needed him to stop investigating." "But he didn't stop," Sheriff Crawford said grimly. "So you escalated. You started poisoning him, didn't you? Small doses, untraceable amounts, made it look like stress and depression were affecting his health." The congregation gasped as the full horror of the situation became clear. Mrs. Henderson clutched her chest, remembering how tired and pale Tom had looked in his final weeks. Pastor Williams gripped the pulpit for support, his faith shaken by the revelation that evil had walked among them wearing the face of compassion. "The night of the fire," Kate continued, her detective training reconstructing the sequence of events, "Tom went to the Johnson house not just to save the family, but to save this puppy from you. He knew you were going to file a false death certificate, collect the insurance money, and dispose of another innocent life." Dr. Henley's confession came in broken whispers. "The Johnsons owed me $12,000 in veterinary bills. They couldn't pay, so I offered them a solution: stage the dog's death in the fire, file an insurance claim for 5 times the animal's actual value, split the payout. They would get money to rebuild their lives, and I would get Emma's care paid for another month." "But the fire got out of control," Sheriff Crawford said. "It wasn't supposed to spread to the house, was it?" "Just the barn, where you'd hidden the puppy, waiting for the right moment to make it look like an accident. The electrical system was old," Dr. Henley said desperately. "I never meant for the family to be in danger. When Tom arrived and started rescuing people, I thought maybe the puppy would die naturally in the smoke. But Tom went back for him. He always went back for the innocent ones." Maggie's tears fell onto the tiny puppy's fur as she understood the full tragedy of her husband's final moments. "Tom didn't die a thief," she whispered. "He died protecting this little life from you. He died a hero, just like he lived." The puppy stirred weakly in her arms, and Duke struggled to lift his massive head. The connection between the three, the dying police dog, the barely living puppy, and the man who'd given his life to protect them both, seemed to transcend the boundaries of species and mortality. "You've been slowly poisoning Duke too, haven't you?" Kate asked, her voice filled with disgust. "During his cancer treatments, you've been accelerating his decline, making him suffer more than necessary so you could justify putting him down sooner." Dr. Henley couldn't meet her eyes. "Duke is dying anyway." "The cancer is treatable," interrupted a new voice from the back of the church. Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinary oncologist from Des Moines, stood in the doorway with a manila folder in her hands. "I drove here as soon as I heard about the funeral. Duke's latest blood work shows significant improvement. His tumors have actually shrunk by 30%. The revelation hit like lightning. Duke wasn't dying from cancer. He was being murdered by the man trusted to heal him." "You son of a bitch," Sheriff Crawford growled, his hand moving instinctively toward his service weapon. "You've been playing God with innocent lives for years, haven't you? Deciding who lives and who dies based on your bank account." Dr. Henley backed toward the altar, his medical bag clutched to his chest like a shield. "You don't understand the pressure, the impossible choices. Emma needs round-the-clock care. The facility is the best in the state. Without insurance fraud, without the extra income, she'd be in some horrible state-run place where they warehouse the forgotten elderly." "So, you became a serial killer," Kate said flatly. "You killed dozens of animals, psychologically tortured their families, stole tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims, and murdered a good man who got too close to the truth." The weight of his crimes seemed to crush Dr. Henley's remaining dignity. He sank into a pew, his medical bag falling to the floor with a metallic clatter. "I'm not a killer," he whispered. "I'm a healer. Everything I did was to save Emma by destroying everyone else," Maggie said, her voice stronger now, fueled by righteous anger. "You made Tom believe he was losing his mind. You made him think he'd stolen money and forgotten about it. You drove him to the edge of suicide, and when that wasn't enough, you poisoned him." Duke managed to lift his head, his amber eyes meeting Maggie's across the space that separated them. In that moment, She understood what her husband had seen in this magnificent animal: loyalty that transcended understanding, love that conquered fear, and a courage that made the impossible seem merely difficult. "The syringe you brought today," Kate said, examining the pre-filled needle that had so agitated Duke. "That wasn't sedative, was it? You came here to finish what you started. Kill Duke and the puppy? Make it look like they died from grief and stress? Clean up the last witnesses to your crimes?" Dr. Henley's silence was confession enough. The church doors burst open as Iowa State Police officers flooded in, their presence summoned by Sheriff Crawford's discreet phone call. But the real drama was unfolding in the hearts and minds of Cedar Falls' citizens who were grappling with the realization that their trusted veterinarian had betrayed everything they held sacred about their small-town community. As handcuffs clicked around Dr. Henley's wrists, the puppy in Maggie's arms stirred more vigorously. Its eyes opened, bright brown and alert, and it let out a tiny bark that seemed to echo Duke's earlier warnings. The sound was weak but determined, a declaration that life would persist despite the evil that had tried to destroy it. Duke's tail moved slightly against the floor, the first sign of hope he'd shown since Tom's death. The old dog seemed to understand that his message had been received, that the truth had finally emerged from the shadows where Dr. Henley had hidden it for so many years. The greatest tragedy wasn't just Dr. Henley's crimes. It was the realization that Tom Mitchell had died believing himself a thief and a failure, never knowing that his final act of heroism would expose a web of deception that had claimed dozens of innocent lives. The arrest of Dr. Henley should have brought closure, but for Maggie Mitchell, it only deepened the abyss of her despair. As the Iowa State Police led the veterinarian away in handcuffs, she clutched the tiny puppy, now named Miracle, against her chest and felt the full weight of her shattered world pressing down like a collapsing building. Tom was gone. Her hero husband, the man who'd coached Little League and visited lonely widows every Sunday, had died believing himself a criminal. The mortgage foreclosure notice in her purse crinkled with each breath, a constant reminder that financial ruin awaited her at home. Duke lay dying beside the casket, his magnificent body finally surrendering to months of deliberate poisoning disguised as cancer treatment. And now she faced the cruelest irony of all. Tom's reputation would be restored posthumously, but she would lose everything they'd built together to pay debts he'd never actually incurred. The congregation dispersed slowly, their whispered conversations mixing sympathy with morbid fascination. Some approached Maggie with gentle words and awkward touches, but their comfort felt hollow against the magnitude of her loss. She was 58 years old, widowed, nearly broke, and responsible for 2 animals who represented the last fragments of her husband's integrity. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Kate Rodriguez knelt beside Duke, her hand resting gently on his massive head. "Dr. Chen says Duke's real condition isn't terminal. With proper treatment without Dr. Henley's interference, he could live several more years." Maggie's laugh was bitter as autumn wind. "With what money, Detective? The bank is foreclosing on our house next month. Tom's pension is frozen pending the investigation clearance, which could take months. I can't afford to keep myself alive, let alone pay for Duke's real cancer treatments." The words hung in the church air like incense, heavy, persistent, and suffocating. Sheriff Crawford stood nearby, his weathered face creased with the weight of institutional failure. "The department will cover Duke's medical expenses," he said quietly. "It's the least we can do after everything." "And what about the puppy?" Maggie asked, stroking Miracle's tiny head. "What about my house? What about the fact that I haven't worked as a full-time nurse in 15 years and no one's going to hire a 58-year-old woman with gaps in her resume?" Kate had no answer. The justice system could punish Dr. Henley's crimes, but it couldn't resurrect the dead or restore the years of financial sacrifice Tom had made to save Duke's life. The $89,000 from the evidence locker, money that Tom had never stolen, remained missing, presumably spent on Emma Henley's care or hidden in accounts that investigators might never find. Duke struggled to his feet, his movement painful but determined. He approached Maggie slowly, his amber eyes holding depths of understanding that transcended human language. When he reached her, he gently nuzzled the puppy in her arms, a gesture so tender it broke something fundamental in her chest. "He knows," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "Duke knows Tom saved this little one. He knows Tom died a hero, not a thief." But heroism, Maggie realized with crushing clarity, didn't pay mortgages or grocery bills. It didn't erase the medical debt from Duke's legitimate cancer treatments or provide stability for a woman whose entire world had collapsed in the span of 3 weeks. The church began to empty as evening shadows stretched across the sanctuary. Pastor Williams approached with the hesitant steps of a man unaccustomed to situations beyond his theological training. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said softly, "the church board has discussed your situation. We'd like to help, but our emergency fund is limited." $500, Maggie said flatly. "Maybe $1,000 if the congregation takes up a special collection. I appreciate the thought, Pastor, but I owe $47,000 in medical bills, and I'm 3 months behind on a mortgage that's bigger than most people's annual salary." The mathematical brutality of her situation was undeniable. Tom's life insurance policy had a suicide clause that voided benefits if death occurred within 2 years of the policy date, and Tom had increased his coverage 18 months ago when Duke's cancer was first diagnosed. Even if investigators proved his death wasn't suicide, the insurance company would fight the claim for years. Duke collapsed again. His breathing labored. "Doctor." Jen approached with her medical bag, but her expression was grim. The poison Dr. Henley used was designed to mimic cancer progression. It's damaged Duke's liver and kidneys. Even with aggressive treatment, his prognosis is uncertain. "How much?" Maggie asked, though she already knew the answer would be impossibly large. "Dialysis, chemotherapy, supportive care. We're looking at $15,000 to $20,000, maybe more." The number hit Maggie like a physical blow. She looked at Duke, who had served their community with unwavering loyalty for 9 years, who had exposed Dr. Henley's crimes at the cost of his own remaining strength, who represented the best of what Tom had been. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't afford to save him." The admission felt like betrayal, like spitting on Tom's grave. But mathematical reality was crueler than emotional truth. Duke would die not from cancer or old age, but from poverty, the same poverty that had driven Dr. Henley to his crimes and Tom to his desperate final acts. Kate Rodriguez stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is wrong," she said, her voice echoing in the nearly empty church. "Duke's a hero, Tom's a hero, and we're going to let them both be destroyed by money?" "Heroes don't pay bills," Sheriff Crawford said sadly. "They just make for good headlines." Miracle stirred in Maggie's arms, letting out a tiny whimper that seemed to punctuate the hopelessness of their situation. This puppy, the last life Tom had saved, would probably end up in a shelter, just another casualty of circumstances beyond anyone's control. The irony was suffocating. Dr. Henley's crimes had been motivated by love for his wife, by the desperate desire to provide for someone he couldn't bear to lose. Now Maggie faced the same impossible choice: watch Duke die for lack of money, or sacrifice her home and future in a probably futile attempt to save him. "There has to be something," Kate said desperately. "Some fund, some program, some way to help." But Maggie knew better. She'd spent enough years as a nurse to understand that tragedy was democratic. It struck regardless of worthiness or need. Good people lost their homes, their health, their hope. Heroes died in poverty, while their heroism was celebrated in newspaper articles that paid no bills and fed no mouths. Duke's breathing grew shallower as twilight settled over Cedar Falls. The great German shepherd who had served with distinction, who had saved countless lives, who had exposed a killer with his final burst of strength, was dying slowly in a church that couldn't afford to save him, surrounded by a community that loved him but lacked the resources to translate that love into action. Maggie made her choice. She kissed Duke's massive head, feeling his coarse fur against her lips. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I can't save you like you saved everyone else." The decision felt like cutting out her own heart with a rusty knife. But economic reality was more brutal than sentiment. Duke would be euthanized humanely, painlessly, surrounded by people who loved him. It was more dignity than many heroes received, but it was also a monument to the cruel mathematics of American life, where love wasn't enough, where heroism couldn't pay for its own preservation. As darkness fell over St. Mary's Lutheran Church, three beings faced their mortality together: an old dog poisoned by greed, a tiny puppy saved by sacrifice, and a widow whose greatest tragedy wasn't losing her husband, but discovering that his heroism couldn't save them from the grinding machinery of debt and desperation that consumed ordinary people with ruthless efficiency. The American dream, Maggie realized with bitter clarity, had sharp teeth and an appetite for heroes. Just as Maggie Mitchell prepared to make the most heartbreaking decision of her life, the church doors burst open with such force that the ancient hinges groaned in protest. A young woman with Tom's distinctive green eyes and his determined jawline stood silhouetted against the evening light, her business suit wrinkled from urgent travel and her face streaked with tears. "Sarah?" Maggie gasped, recognizing her stepdaughter after 5 years of painful estrangement. "What are you doing here?" Sarah Mitchell Thompson rushed down the aisle, her high heels clicking against the worn wooden floors like a frantic heartbeat. Behind her followed a distinguished man in an expensive suit, her husband David, whom Maggie had met only once at their distant wedding. "Mom," Sarah said, the word carrying 5 years of regret and longing. "I came as soon as I heard about Dad, about everything." She knelt beside Duke, her manicured hands gentle on his massive head. "And about what that monster did to him." The story had broken on national news within hours of Dr. Henley's arrest. Beloved small-town veterinarian exposed as serial animal killer had become the lead story on every major network, with Cedar Falls suddenly thrust into the uncomfortable spotlight of national attention. "I'm too late," Maggie said bitterly. "Your father died thinking he was a thief and a failure. And now Duke's dying too, and I can't afford to save him." Sarah's expression hardened with the same determination that had made Tom Mitchell legendary in law enforcement. "Actually, you can." She pulled out her phone, showing Maggie a screen filled with numbers that seemed impossible to comprehend. "David and I started a GoFundMe campaign 3 hours ago. Save Duke, hero dog of Cedar Falls. We've raised $87,000 so far, and it's climbing every minute." Maggie stared at the screen, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. That's not possible." "Dad's story went viral," David explained, his voice gentle but excited. "The video of Duke exposing Dr. Henley has been shared over 2 million times. People are calling him the most loyal dog in America. Donations are pouring in from all 50 states and 12 foreign countries." Kate Rodriguez looked over Maggie's shoulder at the phone screen, her own eyes widening in disbelief. "Look at these comments," she said. A retired police officer from Boston donated $500. A veterinarian from Seattle gave $1,000. There's a donation from a German Shepherd rescue in Germany for €2,000. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Sheriff Crawford, who had been quietly making phone calls in the vestibule, returned with information that would change everything they thought they knew about Tom Mitchell's final weeks. "Maggie," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I just spoke with the state investigators. They found Dr. Henley's hidden accounts, the $89,000 from the evidence locker. Tom never stole it. Henley did 3 years ago. He's been manipulating the books, making it look like Tom had access when he didn't." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Sarah grabbed her stepmother's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Dad wasn't a thief. He never stole anything." "There's more," Sheriff Crawford continued. "The investigators found Tom's real financial records hidden in his patrol car. Every penny he spent on Duke's treatments came from his own savings, from selling his coin collection, his fishing boat, even his father's war medals. He never touched a dime of department money." Maggie's world tilted on its axis. "But the debt, the medical bills, were all legitimate," Dr. Chen interrupted, having overheard the conversation. "Tom brought Duke to me for second opinions, experimental treatments, anything that might help. He spent $47,000 of his own money trying to save his partner, and it was working until Dr. Henley started poisoning Duke during routine checkups." The cruel mathematics of the situation became clear. Tom had bankrupted himself, saving Duke's life, only to have Dr. Henley systematically destroy his work through deliberate poisoning. The veterinarian had been eliminating evidence of his insurance fraud by killing the animals whose deaths he'd already reported and collected money for. "Dad mortgaged the house to pay for Duke's treatments," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "When I wouldn't take his phone calls, when I was too proud and stubborn to reconcile, he was facing bankruptcy alone. He was carrying all this burden by himself." Maggie remembered Tom's increasingly desperate behavior in his final weeks. The weight loss, the insomnia, the way he'd stare at Duke with such fierce protectiveness. She'd attributed it to stress over the corruption investigation, never realizing he was fighting a war on multiple fronts, saving his partner's life, protecting the community from Dr. Henley's crimes, and bearing the crushing weight of financial ruin in silence. "The phone calls," Kate said suddenly. "The threatening calls Tom received. Dr. Henley wasn't just pressuring him to stop investigating. He was blackmailing him, wasn't he?" Sheriff Crawford nodded grimly. "Henley told Tom that if he exposed the insurance fraud, he'd make sure Duke's treatments were discontinued. He had Tom trapped, stay quiet and watch Duke die from natural causes, or speak up and have Duke's real medical care terminated immediately." The psychological torture Tom had endured became clear. Dr. Henley had been playing a chess game with human and animal lives as pawns, manipulating Tom's love for Duke to ensure his silence while slowly murdering the dog he was trying to save. But the most profound revelation came from an unexpected source. Pastor Williams approached carrying a box of letters that had been found in Tom's patrol car. Letters he'd written to Sarah over the 5 years of their estrangement, but never sent. "Your father wrote to you every week," he told Sarah gently. "He kept copies of every letter, hoping someday he'd find the courage to send them." Sarah's hands shook as she opened the first letter, dated just 1 week after their last argument. Tom's distinctive handwriting filled the page. "Dear Sarah, I know you're still angry about the wedding, about me not walking you down the aisle because I had to work. I know you think the job always came first, that I cared more about strangers than my own family. You're not wrong to feel that way, but I need you to understand. Every life I save, every person I help, I do it thinking about you. I became a cop to make the world safer for my daughter. Even if she never speaks to me again, I'll keep making it safer for her." The letters revealed a man tormented by the gulf between his daughter and himself, a father who'd sacrificed personal happiness for duty, but never stopped loving the child who saw that sacrifice as abandonment. "He wrote about Duke in every letter," Sarah sobbed, reading another entry. "Duke understands what you don't, that sometimes love means putting yourself in danger to protect what matters most. I failed you as a father, Sarah, but I won't fail Duke as a partner. If saving his life costs me everything else, it's a price worth paying." The final letter, dated just 2 days before Tom's death, contained the most heartbreaking revelation of all. "Sarah, if something happens to me, please take care of Duke. He's more than a partner. He's the son I raised when I couldn't figure out how to be the father you needed. If I die tomorrow, let it be said that Tom Mitchell loved 2 beings with all his heart, his daughter Sarah and a German shepherd who never judged him for his failures." Duke stirred at the sound of Sarah's crying, lifting his massive head with tremendous effort. When their eyes met, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the barriers of species and time. This dog had been her father's heart made manifest, his capacity for loyalty and sacrifice given physical form. "I'm so sorry, Duke," Sarah whispered, stroking his graying muzzle. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when Dad needed me. I'm sorry he had to choose between saving you and maintaining his pride." But Duke's amber eyes held no judgment, only the same infinite forgiveness that had defined his relationship with Tom. In that moment, Sarah understood what her father had seen in this magnificent animal, not just a working partner, but a reminder that love required action, that loyalty demanded sacrifice, and that true heroes measured their worth not in recognition received, but in lives preserved. The GoFundMe campaign had exceeded $100,000, ensuring not only Duke's medical treatment but also the salvation of Maggie's home and the establishment of a fund for other police canine families facing similar crises. More importantly, it had restored Tom Mitchell's reputation and revealed the true scope of his heroism. A man who'd risked everything to save his partner while protecting his community from a killer hiding behind a healer's mask. As evening deepened into night, 3 generations of Mitchell women sat together in St. Mary's Lutheran Church, united by grief but sustained by truth, surrounded by the community Tom had served with such quiet dedication, watching over a dog whose loyalty had solved crimes, exposed corruption, and ultimately revealed that heroism sometimes wore fur and answered to its name with a tail wag. 6 months later, the late spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Cedar Falls' newly established K-9 Memorial Center, illuminating a scene that would have seemed impossible during those dark days in St. Mary's Lutheran Church. Maggie Mitchell, now 59 and wearing the crisp white uniform of a registered nurse, knelt beside Duke as he patiently supervised the training of his most eager student. Miracle had grown into a magnificent young German shepherd, his coat gleaming with health and his eyes bright with intelligence that seemed to bridge the gap between his predecessor's wisdom and his own boundless enthusiasm. At 8 months old, he already showed the instincts that would make him an exceptional therapy dog, but more importantly, he carried within him the living legacy of Tom Mitchell's final act of heroism. "Easy, boy," Maggie said softly as Miracle bounded toward a group of elderly residents from Sunset Manor, the local nursing home where she now worked 3 days a week. "Remember what Duke taught you: gentle approaches, calm energy." Duke, his silver muzzle now completely gray but his amber eyes still sharp with purpose, lay in the shade of an oak tree that the community had planted in Tom's memory. The aggressive cancer treatments had been successful beyond anyone's expectations. Dr. Chen later discovered that most of Duke's symptoms had been caused by Dr. Henley's slow poisoning rather than actual tumor progression. With proper treatment and the elimination of toxins from his system, Duke had regained much of his strength and vitality. Sarah Mitchell Thompson pushed her 2-year-old daughter Emma on the swing set that David had donated to the center, her laughter mixing with the child's delighted squeals. The little girl bore Tom's distinctive green eyes and his stubborn chin, though she would never meet the grandfather who would have adored her beyond measure. "Grandpa Duke!" Emma called out, her toddler pronunciation turning the German shepherd's name into something musical and pure. Duke's tail thumped against the ground. The child was the only human he allowed to take such liberties with his dignity, and he wore the honorary title of grandfather, with pride that would have made Tom beam. The transformation of Cedar Falls had been gradual but profound. The national attention following Dr. Henley's arrest had brought unexpected tourism, with people traveling from across the country to visit Duke's town and hear the story of the dog who'd exposed a killer. More importantly, it had attracted resources. A veterinary college had established a satellite clinic specializing in canine officer care, and a major pet food company had funded the memorial center where Maggie now worked as both a nurse and animal therapy coordinator. Kate Rodriguez approached from the training facility, where she now served as director of the Tom Mitchell Canine Academy, a program that trained both police dogs and therapy animals. Her uniform bore new insignia, Sheriff Rodriguez having been elected to replace the retiring Bob Crawford in a landslide victory that reflected the community's faith in her judgment and integrity. "How's our star pupil doing today?" she asked, watching as Miracle gently allowed an elderly man with Parkinson's disease to stroke his ears. "He's got his father's instincts," Maggie replied, using the term that had naturally evolved to describe the relationship between Duke and Miracle. "Yesterday at the nursing home, he alerted me to Mrs. Patterson's blood sugar dropped 15 minutes before her glucose monitor registered any change." The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Duke's successor showed the same uncanny ability to detect medical emergencies that had made his predecessor legendary in law enforcement. But where Duke had been trained for confrontation and pursuit, Miracle was being shaped for comfort and healing, a living symbol of how tragedy could be transformed into hope through patient love and unwavering dedication. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived for her weekly examination of Duke, her mobile veterinary unit now a familiar sight in Cedar Falls. The oncologist had relocated her practice from Des Moines after being moved by Tom's story and the community's response to it. Her pro bono care for retired police dogs had expanded into a full-service animal hospital that specialized in treating working animals whose handlers couldn't afford expensive procedures. "His blood work looks excellent," she told Maggie after completing Duke's examination. "Whatever Dr. Henley did to him, his body has recovered remarkably well. I'd say he's got several good years left, especially with Miracle keeping him active." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Miracle bounded over with the enthusiasm that had become his trademark, carrying a tennis ball that bore the teeth marks of 2 generations of German shepherds. Duke rose slowly, his movements careful but determined, and began the patient process of teaching his young protege the difference between play and work. The sight never failed to move Maggie to tears. 2 animals, separated by age and experience but united by their connection to Tom, creating a bond that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Duke had found purpose in his retirement by becoming mentor and father figure to the puppy Tom had died saving, while Miracle had discovered his calling through the guidance of the dog who'd exposed his would-be killer. Pastor Williams arrived for the weekly blessing service, a tradition that had evolved naturally as the center became a place of healing for both animals and humans. The elderly minister had initially been skeptical of incorporating animal therapy into his ministry, but the undeniable peace that Duke and Miracle brought to suffering people had convinced him that God's love operated through many different channels. "Shall we begin?" he asked, and the small gathering formed a circle around the memorial oak tree. The weekly service had become a cornerstone of the center's operations, bringing together families dealing with loss, veterans struggling with PTSD, elderly residents battling loneliness, and children learning to overcome fear through interaction with gentle, trained animals. It wasn't formal religious worship so much as a community acknowledgement that healing took many forms, and that sometimes the most profound comfort came from creatures who offered love without judgment or condition. As Pastor Williams began his simple prayer of gratitude, Duke positioned himself between Maggie and Sarah, his massive body a bridge between past and future. Miracle, sensing the solemnity of the moment, sat quietly beside Emma, his presence a calming influence on the active toddler. "We gather today to remember Tom Mitchell," Pastor Williams said, his voice carrying across the peaceful grounds, "not just as a hero who died saving lives, but as a man who understood that love requires action, that loyalty demands sacrifice, and that the greatest gifts we can give are often the smallest kindnesses we show to those who cannot repay us." Maggie felt the truth of those words resonate through her transformed life. Her return to nursing at 59 had been challenging, requiring her to update skills and adapt to new technologies, but the GoFundMe campaign had provided not just financial stability, but also the confidence to pursue dreams she'd abandoned decades earlier. Her specialization in animal-assisted therapy had made her one of the most sought-after professionals in Iowa, and her work was helping to establish protocols that would benefit patients across the Midwest. Sarah's reconciliation with her stepmother had healed wounds that both women had carried for years. The discovery of Tom's unset letters had revealed the depth of his love and the pain of his silence, teaching them both that pride was a luxury that families couldn't afford. Emma would grow up knowing her grandfather through stories and through the animals he'd loved, understanding that heroism lived on in the daily choices people made to help rather than harm. As the service concluded, Duke rose and approached Tom's memorial plaque, his ritual as constant as sunrise. He would sit quietly for exactly 5 minutes, as if reporting the day's activities to his eternal partner, then return to his duties with renewed purpose. Miracle had begun copying this behavior, though his version involved more tail-wagging and less solemnity. "He still misses him," Sarah observed, watching Duke's vigil. "They both do," Maggie replied. "But they've found a way to honor that missing by helping others heal." The truth was that none of them had truly recovered from Tom's death. They had simply learned to carry their grief in ways that created meaning rather than bitterness. Duke channeled his loss into protecting and teaching Miracle. Maggie transformed her pain into compassion for other families facing medical crises with their beloved animals. Sarah used her business skills to expand the Memorial Center's reach, ensuring that Tom's legacy would continue helping K-9 officers and their families for generations to come. As evening approached and the center prepared to close, Duke and Miracle walked their final patrol of the grounds together, the aging mentor checking security with professional thoroughness, while his young protege practiced the careful attention to detail that would serve him throughout his career as a therapy dog. Tom Mitchell had been buried believing himself a failure and a thief, never knowing that his greatest act of heroism would be revealed by the loyal partner who refused to let injustice go unchallenged. Now, in the golden light of an Iowa sunset, his legacy lived on in the bond between two German shepherds, in the healing work of the center that bore his name, and in the quiet understanding that love, once given freely, never truly dies. It simply finds new ways to serve, protect, and heal. Sometimes, life's greatest tragedies become doorways to unexpected joy, and nowhere is this truth more evident than in the transformed lives of Cedar Falls' heroes. When Deputy Sheriff Tom Mitchell died believing himself a failure, his loyal German shepherd Duke refused to let that lie stand. Through Duke's desperate barking at his partner's funeral, A web of deception unraveled, revealing not shame but extraordinary heroism, a man who'd sacrificed everything to save his four-legged partner and protect an innocent puppy from a killer hiding behind a healer's mask. Today, at 59, Maggie Mitchell has found purpose she never imagined possible, working as a specialized nurse in animal-assisted therapy. Her stepdaughter Sarah has reconciled after 5 years of estrangement, bringing granddaughter Emma into a family healed by truth and strengthened by shared loss. Duke, once dying from deliberate poisoning, now mentors Miracle, the puppy Tom died saving, in a memorial center that brings comfort to hundreds of families dealing with grief and medical crises. Their story proves that it's never too late for second chances, that loyalty transcends death, and that the bonds we forge, whether with family or the animals we love, can transform tragedy into triumph. Sometimes our darkest moments become the foundation for our brightest tomorrows. What bonds in your life have surprised you with their strength during difficult times? Have you ever discovered that what seemed like an ending was actually a new beginning? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.